Okay, today I'm going to talk about David Hume. Hume, his dates were 1711 to 1776. He's one of the empiricists, British empiricists. He was part of the Scottish Enlightenment. He was actually the greatest philosopher in English, to write in English. The other people of the Scottish Enlightenment were Adam Smith, the greatest economist who ever wrote in English, and then Boswell, the greatest biographer. So that's a very amazing period in which he lived. Three great thinkers, all part of the Scottish Enlightenment. Anyway, David Hume is a British empiricist because Great Britain included Scotland, from which Hume came. The other empiricists were Locke from England and Berkeley from Ireland. I've already talked about Locke and Berkeley. So today I want to talk about David Hume, and he's known as the Sceptic, Hume the Sceptic. He was actually everybody loved him. Even Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was paranoid about everybody, befriended Hume. Ultimately, he came to England because he was persecution in France and Europe, and Hume took him in. But even Hume couldn't, stop Rousseau's paranoia. But anyway, so Hume is were the greatest. Actually, most people consider him the greatest philosopher ever to write in English. Anyway, he's a skeptic. Hume the Skeptic. Bertrand Russell. Let me just read one thing Russell says about Hume. This is Bertrand Russell. To refute Hume has been, ever since he wrote, a favorite pastime among metaphysicians. For my part, I find none of their refutations convincing. Nevertheless, I cannot but hope that something less skeptical than Hume's system may be discoverable. So that's what I want to talk about today, what Russell is talking about. What is Hume's skepticism? First, let me say a little about Hume's view of where knowledge comes from. Hume is an empiricist. Hume is very much like Locke in that knowledge is based upon, all our knowledge begins with sense experience. So basically what Hume has is you have somebody perceiving, let's say, an apple. Like here's an apple, right? This person's looking at this apple. I guess over here. Anyway, the apple's over here and this person's looking. So the light waves come from the apple, impinge on the retina of the eye, and that sets up a set of electrochemical transactions. Ultimately, results in the perception in a perception of red and a shape and so on. Hume calls these. He calls the immediate impression on the mind, the red or the shape. He calls that an impression. So when you see red, that's an impression of red. If you see a circle, that would be an impression of roundness. So that's what we perceive: yellow, green. These are all impressions. You stub your toe, you feel a pain. That's an impression. Okay, so basically what Hume has are impressions. These are the immediate source of knowledge, impressions. And then ultimately these impressions fade. They become less intense, and then they turn into ideas. So for example, I look at this apple. I have an impression of red. Okay, it's immediate. I see the red. Now I put the apple away and I could recall the red. I could remember it. But it's less intense. It's a faded image. If I really had the red apple before me, it would be much more intense. If I stub my toe, I feel a pain, but then as time goes on, the pain is a memory. So for Hume, ideas are basically faded images. And basically for Hume, you have simple ideas and complex ideas. So this apple is a collection of complex ideas. The complex ideas would be the shape, would be the collection of the shape, the color, the feel of it, the taste of it, and so on. You put all those together and you get a complex idea of the apple. For Hume as an empiricist, so all knowledge is ultimately going to be rooted in sense impressions, all ideas. If you have an idea of something and you do not have any, and somebody says, well, what do you mean by that? And you can't point to an impression, then Hume would say you're talking nonsense. So if I say yellow, Hume says, what do you mean by that? I could show them a yellow banana. I could say, that's what I mean. When I look at that, that's what I mean. if he says, what do you mean by a loud noise? I say, I could hit something and make a loud noise. Okay, that's what I mean. But if I just make up some color, la la booma, a color, and Hume says, well, what do you mean by that color? And I say, it's a color. Well, if I can't point to something, an impression, then that color, it's a meaningless word. So for Hume, this is very important because all meaningful concepts have to be rooted in impressions. Now, there are certain things that do not. That's when you're referring to the world. Everything you say about the world has to be rooted in impression, sense impression. But when you're just when relations of ideas are different, you could define, for example, a bachelor is an unmarried man. So that's just true by definition. A circle is round. That's true by definition. So certain things are simply true by definition. You can make up your own terms and just define anything you want, and then you could use that word, okay, and then relate ideas. So basically, for Hume, if you're talking about the world outside of yourself, then those are matters of fact. On the other hand, there are simply relations of ideas. All bachelors are unmarried, for example. That's simply a relation of ideas. Let me give you an example of the distinction between a matter of fact and relation of ideas, because this is fundamental to Hume. Hume distinguishes between matters of fact and relations of ideas. Let's say I have different colored pens, a blue, a red, a green, a black, and I tell you, I'll draw a circle. I drew a circle. Now tell me something about the circle I drew. Okay, now I have different colored pens. So what color pen did I use? If you can tell me something about that circle. You could say, well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you something about that circle. It's round. Now, how did you know that without looking? Hume would say you knew it because the circle's being round is not a matter of fact. It's a matter of definition. The very meaning of the word circle includes its being round. If I say to you, that person is a bachelor, you know without asking him or without checking the marriage registers or anything like that, you know that person is unmarried because by definition, a bachelor is unmarried. Okay, but one thing, if I drew a circle, you can tell me without looking that it's round, but you cannot tell me what color that circle is. You can't tell me if it's blue or green or black, because that is a matter of fact. And that you have to know by actually looking, and there has to be some impression on your, there has to be some impression that you perceive. Okay, that's Hume's fork. Okay, so Hume's fork is something, right? Hume's fork. Hume's fork it's basically, I'll erase so I could see if I'm sorry, put this up here. Sorry. Okay, here's Hume. Let me erase all this stuff here. Hume's fork is basically, it's a pitchfork, double-pronged, and you have relations of ideas, and matters of fact. So all knowledge is going to be grounded in one of these two. Relations of ideas, for example, a circle is round. A circle is round. That's true by definition. And I'll put over here, the circle is red. To know that, you have to look. That's a matter of fact. That's Hume's fork. And Hume said, now Hume, you might say, that's so what? Well, what's so great about that? Well, Leibniz had made this distinction before. This is actually a very important distinction. But what Hume does with this distinction is amazing. Let me read one of the very famous passages from Hume. Using this fork here, knowledge is either going to be a matter of relations of ideas or matters of fact. So if I say it's raining outside, and for that statement to mean anything, I must be able to that's a matter of fact. It's raining. I must be able to look outside and see if it's raining. If I can't do that, then my statement is meaningless. Hume says when we run over libraries persuaded of these empiricist principles, basically it's talking about Hume's fork, the empiricist principles, knowledge is either this type or this type. When we run over libraries persuaded of these empiricist principles, what havoc must we make if we take in our hand any volume of divinity or school metaphysics? For instance, let us ask, does it contain any abstract reasoning concerning quantity and number? Over here. Is it mathematics? Is it logic? Is it simply things we're talking about that are true by definition? No, it doesn't. Okay. Does it contain any experimental reasoning? Over here. Concerning matter of fact and existence? No? Okay, if it doesn't contain this or this, commit it to the flames, for it can contain nothing but sophistry and illusion. That's Hume's fork. And you know what Hume does? He actually commits to the flame. Not only things like God, but other things like things that we all take for granted. Causality, for example. We all believe that one thing causes another thing. If you have fire and you light and you put a piece of paper up to fire, it's going to burn. And you would say, well, the paper burned because of the fire. The fire caused it to burn. Using Hume's fork, Hume gets rid of causality. He gets rid of induction, the idea that we can make inferences to the future based upon our present experience. For example, I believe when I let go of this pen that it's going to fall. Why do I believe that? Because from experience, every time I let go of this pen, it falls. So why do I believe it's going to fall the next time? From experience. That's induction. I believe the sun's going to come up tomorrow. That's because of inductive reasoning. I apply experience to the future. And Hume says, using Hume's empiricist principles, Hume's going to get rid of induction. He's going to say we have no reason to believe that induction is true. There's no way we can justify that. He's going to get rid of belief in the external world. Berkeley had already done his work for him there. So Hume is going to get rid of a lot of stuff that we all take for granted. And ever since Hume, there's been a whole company of philosophers who have tried to refute Hume. That's why I read Russell at the beginning. To refute Hume has been, ever since he wrote, a favorite pastime among metaphysicians. And then Russell also said, Hume's skeptical conclusions are equally difficult to refute and to accept. The result was a challenge to philosophers, which, in my opinion, has still not been adequately met. So that's what I want to talk in the next lecture. I'll do that because I only have a few minutes in this one. So I'm just kind of introducing Hume. So Hume is going to call into question fundamental assumptions. Hume's very important for epistemology because going back to the traditional definition of knowledge is justified true belief. That's probably one of the best definitions out there. There are some problems with it ever since, the Gettier examples. I talked about Gettier in a previous lecture. But anyway, it's a pretty good definition, at least to begin with. And you could maybe tweak it a little here and there. Knowledge is justified true belief. Hume is going to say that we are not justified in believing in an external world. We are not justified in believing in causality, that one thing causes another. We are not justified in believing in induction, that we can make inferences to the future based upon our previous experience. So Hume is this is Hume's fork, and Hume's going to use Hume's fork and basically to cause havoc throughout the philosophical world. And he's going to so anyway, Hume the skeptic. Not only is he a brilliant thinker, but he's a beautiful writer. So if you want to sit down and read some good philosophy, and actually Hume is a great writer. So most philosophers are really terrible writers, like Kant and Aristotle, and they're not fun to read, but Hume is actually fun to read. So next time I'll talk more about Hume. This is basically just an introduction. So next time I'm going to talk about Hume's fork and show how he uses it to criticize causation and induction.